Night Shift Encounters. It was the weekend before Christmas last year. Because of the holidays, I was off from college and therefore could work the night shift. This one particular Saturday night, I was assigned the night shift. Due to the excessive load of Christmas, it was stocking night, and therefore a lot of work had to be done. I was accompanied by two other colleagues, John and Isaac. The night started off as usual. My shift was from 11 at night until 7 in the morning. I started off working in the appliance section, logging in all the new stock. While I was doing so, I saw someone from the corner of my eye pass through the aisle that I was in. I was startled at first. It could have been either John or Isaac, I thought to myself. So I called out each of their names, but no one replied. Due to the shift of routine, I was very sleep deprived, and I wasn't right in the head. I thought that it must be my imagination. After finishing up in the appliance aisle, I headed back to the depot in the back of the store to log all of the boxes that had arrived earlier that night. As soon as I entered the storeroom, I could smell a foul odor from afar. Must be the fresh stock of salmon, I thought to myself. I didn't pay any heed to it and went back to what I was doing. As I was logging in the boxes, I had this feeling that someone was standing behind me and staring directly at me. I turned around, but there was no one there. The night was getting creepier by every passing minute. I rounded up my work in the depot and headed back to the store to finish off the rest of the chores. I had to put the new stock of apparel onto the shelf. The shelf was empty, therefore I could see through the racks. As I was putting away the new layer of clothes, my eyes peeled right in front of me, and I saw something that frightened me to death. A terrifying man with blood dripping from all over his hands and face and a huge knife in his right hand, staring right at me. I screamed and ran away from him, and he started running after me. I went and hid behind the cashier and tried calling Isaac multiple times on my phone, but he didn't pick up. I could see the serial killer running here and there trying to locate me. In the meantime, I rang up 911 and told them about the incident. Suddenly, the man's footsteps stopped. I slowly turned my head to the left, and there he was, staring right at me with an evil smirk on his face. I jumped across the cashier and ran outside where the cops had already arrived. This was the quickest response time I have ever experienced. The cops went in and arrested the man, and as it turns out, he was a cannibalistic serial killer who escaped from a nearby mental asylum 2 days back. He had already killed Isaac and John in the depot, hence the foul smell. This came as an intense shock to me, and I couldn't believe what I had witnessed. This was all over the news channels. The following morning, I immediately resigned from Walmart as this experience was enough to scar me for life. The Creepy Stalker. It was a late Friday night, and the Walmart was practically empty. The lights flickered overhead, casting an eerie glow over the aisles of merchandise. For most people, this would have been an uncomfortable setting, but for Jacob, it was the perfect place for his twisted hobby. Jacob had been coming to Walmart for months, ever since he had discovered there was a blind spot in the security camera footage. He had memorized the schedule of the night shift workers, and he knew exactly when they would be patrolling each aisle. For Jacob, the Walmart was a playground, and the unsuspecting shoppers were his prey. He always made sure to choose his targets carefully, watching them from a distance before making his move. He would follow them through the aisles, watched as they picked out their groceries and went about their business. But for Jacob, it was never enough to simply watch. He needed to get closer, to feel the fear in their eyes as he crept up behind them. Tonight, he had his sights set on a young woman with blonde hair and bright blue eyes. She was wearing a pink hoodie and a pair of ripped jeans, and she had a cart full of groceries. Jacob had been watching her for a few minutes, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. As she turned down an empty aisle, Jacob followed behind her, his heart racing with the anticipation. He could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins as he watched her reach for a bag of chips. He crept closer, the sound of his footsteps muffled by the carpeted floor. Suddenly, the woman turned around and Jacob froze in his tracks. For a moment, their eyes locked, and Jacob felt a surge of excitement mixed with fear. But then, the woman smiled and turned back to her shopping, completely unaware of the danger that was lurking right behind her. Jacob took a deep breath and continued to follow her, keeping a safe distance. He watched as she made her way down the aisle, grabbing a few more items before heading towards the checkout. Jacob knew that this was his chance, his opportunity to strike. He waited until the woman was standing in line at the register, her back turned to him. He crept up behind her, his hand reaching out to touch her shoulder. But just as his fingertips brushed against her hoodie, the woman turned around, her eyes wide with terror. Jacob froze, unsure of what to do next. He had never been caught before. The look on the woman's face sent shivers down his spine. Without a word, he turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness of the empty store. From that night on, the Walmart became a place of terror for the young woman. Every time she walked through those automatic doors, she felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She was constantly looking over her shoulder, afraid that she might once again encounter the Walmart stalker. And yet, Jacob continued to stalk the aisles of Walmart, searching for his next victim. He had become bolder, more daring, as he continued to evade the store's security measures. He had even started to leave small tokens for his victims, little trinkets that he had stolen from the store shelves. The police had been called several times, but Jacob always managed to slip away before they arrived. It was as if he was invisible, a ghost haunting the Walmart's empty halls. And then one night, Jacob's luck ran out. He had been stalking a young mother and her child, watching from a distance as they made their way through the toy section. But just as he was about to make his move, he heard the sound of footsteps approaching. It was a security guard, his flashlight illuminating the darkened aisles. Jacob froze, unsure of what to do. He knew that he was trapped with no way out. The security guard was getting closer, his footsteps echoing off the tiled floor. Jacob knew that he had to act fast. He looked around, searching for a way to escape, but there was nowhere to go, no place to hide. He was trapped. The security guard turned the corner and saw Jacob standing there, frozen with fear. He reached for his walkie-talkie, ready to call for backup, but before he could speak, Jacob lunged at him, his hands wrapping around the guard's neck. The guard fought back, struggling to break free, but Jacob was too strong, too determined. He squeezed harder, his fingers digging into the guard's flesh. The guard tried to scream, but the air was trapped in his throat. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the guard went limp. Jacob released his grip and the guard's body crumpled to the ground. Jacob stood there for a moment, staring at the lifeless body at his feet. It was then that he realized what he had become. He was no longer just a stalker, no longer just a twisted hobbyist. He was a murderer. Jacob knew he had to get out of the Walmart, to leave this place behind forever. He ran towards the exit, his heart pounding in his chest. But as he reached for the door handle, he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was the police, their guns drawn, their faces grim. They had been waiting for him, and now there was nowhere left to run. Jacob was taken into custody. He spent the rest of his life behind bars, but even in prison, he couldn't escape the memory of the Walmart, the thrill of the chase, the rush of the adrenaline. In the end, the Walmart stalker had gotten exactly what he deserved. But for those who had been his victims, for those who had been haunted by his twisted games, the memory of that Walmart would never fade. It would remain forever etched in their minds. A place of fear and terror. A place where the darkest nightmares came to life. Crazed Walmart employee. It was a dark and stormy night. When Sarah entered the Walmart to pick up some last-minute items for her Halloween party, she had always found the store a little eerie with its fluorescent lighting and crowded aisles, but tonight there was something different. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and she couldn't shake the feeling that somebody was watching her. As she made her way through the store, she noticed an employee following her. He wore the standard blue vest and name tag, but there was something off about him. His eyes, they were glazed over, and he seemed to be muttering to himself. Sarah tried to ignore him and continue shopping, but every time she turned around, he was there. Finally, Sarah had had enough and approached the employee. "Can I help you?" she asked, trying to sound friendly. The employee didn't respond at first, instead just staring at her with a blank expression. Then, he suddenly lunged at her, grabbing her arm with surprising strength. Sarah screamed and tried to pull away, but the man's grip only tightened. "Let go of me!" she shouted, struggling to break free. The man didn't say a word, instead dragging Sarah towards the back of the store. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to think of a way out of this situation. As they reached the storage area, the man shoved her into a small room and locked the door behind them. Sarah was trapped, alone, with a crazed Walmart employee. She tried to reason with him, pleading for him to let her go, but he just laughed in response. His laughter was cold and manic, sending shivers down Sarah's spine. You're not going anywhere," he said, pulling a large knife out of his pocket. "I'm going to make sure of that." Sarah's heart raced as she backed away from the man. Realizing that it was too late, she had left her phone in her car. She was completely cut off from the outside world, trapped in a dark room with a psychopath. For what felt like hours, Sarah cowered in the corner of the room as the man paced back and forth. She could hear him muttering to himself, and it was clear that he was not in a stable state of mind. She knew that her only hope was to find a way out before he could harm her. Finally, Sarah saw her chance. The man had left the knife on a nearby shelf, and he was distracted by his own thoughts. She lunged for the knife, managing to grab it just as the man turned back towards her. She held it out in front of her, trying to look as confident as possible. "Stay back," she warned him. "I mean it." The man just laughed again, taking a step towards her. Sarah knew that she had no other choice. With a scream, she plunged the knife into the man's chest. There was a sickening sound as the blade sunk into the flesh, and the man fell to the ground with a thud. Sarah was shaking, but she knew she had no time to waste. She had to get out of the store before anyone found her. As she made her way towards the exit, Sarah could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She was covered in blood and shaking with fear, but she knew that she had survived. She burst through the front doors of the store, collapsing onto the pavement outside. It wasn't until the police arrived that Sarah learned the full story. The crazed Walmart employee had actually been a former employee who had been fired for stealing. He had been living in the store for weeks, hiding in the shadows, watching the customers. And when he saw Sarah, he had become fixated on her, determined to keep her trapped in the store forever.